Good afternoon, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Today is June the 23rd, 2021. My name is Faraz Patel, and this is another edition of the Daily Factor, and I'll be in your company for the next 1 hour. Well, of course, as we do every day, we'll be going to our local updates, then followed by our international news, and we will be going to India to find out the COVID-19 situation there. We'll then be crossing over to community news. Then after that, your market updates with Petri, Reading, LEIGH, and then, of course, we'll be wrapping up with a sports update. But before we go into our local updates, let's give you a daily COVID-19 update, and the numbers continues to rise. 11,093 new COVID-19 cases were identified. Unfortunately, another 297 people lost their lives due to the virus, compared to the 93 that were experienced yesterday, bringing the total number of fatalities to 59,092. Well, it was in 2004 that one of the most gruesome murders experienced in South Africa had occurred. It will be up next on your local updates. It was in 2004 when Leigh Matthews was murdered by her then boyfriend Donovan Moodley. Moodley was sentenced to prison for life after being convicted for murdering Leigh. But this week, the Matthews family was given a call by the Correctional Services Department for a potential parole release of Moodley. Of course, this did get the family upset, and so they should be. Well, joining me to go ahead and discuss this, and of course, taking our minds back to that year of 2004, I'd like to welcome the Advocacy Manager for the Women and Men Against Child Abuse, Luke Lamprecht. Luke, good afternoon, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Faraz. I appreciate your time.
No, it's an absolute pleasure, and we thank you for joining us. I think, Luke, you know, the murder of Leigh Matthews is just yet another chapter in the long history of gender-based violence that our country continues to suffer.
Absolutely. The difficulty that we have at the moment is that we are not clear from the Correctional Services Department as to what the processes are that relate to parole and what the family have been asked to engage in. So the lack of clarity around these processes is the real problem we're facing with the fight against gender-based violence.
And I think, Luke, I mean, obviously you've been close with the family, and yesterday you gave a press briefing at what had happened. One of the things I picked up is that there seems to be a lack of remorse from Donovan Moodley, and I think that in itself shows that it doesn't seem as if he fully takes accountability for what he did back in 2004.
There's two issues around that. I think the first is that we are very clear that based on the judgment where he was convicted and sentenced, the judge said that he has not made a full disclosure. So in order for you to show remorse, you have to tell the truth. So if we look back at the TRC process in South Africa, and someone like Bishop Desmond Tutu was instrumental in that process, he would say you cannot be reconciled to that which you do not know. So the lack of truth is the first element, and within the element of the lack of truth is you can't then show true remorse. And if you don't show true remorse, you are not rehabilitated because you have not made full atonement for what you have done and to whom you have wronged.
Yeah, and speaking on that, I mean, again, you come out with the truth. That is your first step of having that sense of remorse. In Donovan Moodley's case, it seems as if he's trying to shy away from it, and that in itself shouldn't really give legs or ground for there to be full parole granted to him.
Look, I think that's exactly right. I think the first issue you raise is the fact that there is not full remorse because there is not full disclosure, and without truth, you cannot show rehabilitation. There's a little bit more to it in the sense that he didn't make full disclosure at the time of his trial and conviction, and in addition to that, in the middle of his incarceration, he made an application for a retrial where he said there was an alternative version that he was willing to provide, but they never provided it because his application was denied. So he has actually said there is another version which he has not come forward with because it would not be in his favor, because he has not in any way had any of those appeals or those applications for retrials granted. And then the final thing is that in this current process, there has been a request by the Matthews family that information is provided by correctional services, which needs to be consented to by Mr. Moodley, around what he has done in terms of his rehabilitation, and that has not been forthcoming. So there's not been truth, there's not been remorse, and there's certainly not been rehabilitation from any version that we can see.
Yeah, and I think I want to touch on the rehabilitation because that's the first step of course, having that sense of accountability, and also at the same time, him trying to commit somewhere to society where society can look at him and say, well, here's a changed man, even if he was a convicted murderer. That rehabilitation, as you say, is not forthcoming, and that in itself, again, is more grounds for him not to have the parole, which it seems the Correctional Services Department seems to be giving him.
No, look, I think that's the essence of the question, is what qualifies somebody for parole? Now, is it something that is an administrative process where the rights of the incarcerated person are put above those of the victim? Now, they will tell us that that is not true. So correctional services will say that it is not a right of the inmate to get a parole hearing. It is something that they need to apply for, and the rights of the victims are taken into consideration. We are challenging whether that is in fact true, because it doesn't appear that the victims' rights are being taken into consideration, and it appears that they are not being heard in the process, because it's a process that relates specifically to the rights of the inmate. And we don't believe that there's a balance within correctional services of those two sets of rights.
Luke, you've obviously been in close contact with the family, assisting them during the summer. I've seen Mr. Okay, I think it seems to be a noise there. Mr. Matthews seems to be, very sad with regards to what is currently happening. There's a sense of emotion of what is currently happening. Just give us an idea of how the family is currently feeling right now. Of course, the Correctional Services Department came to them, made this request. So can you just give us an idea of what the family is currently going through at this moment?
First of all, apologies. I'm struggling with But John, the family are really just feeling that they are not being heard. So the big issue we face is that if you look at the criminal justice process, somebody has to be proven guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. And the question we are asking is, if somebody is going to be given parole, surely the burden should shift to correctional services and to Mr. Moodley to prove he has been rehabilitated and is entitled to parole, rather than the family needing to come forward with reasons as to why he should remain incarcerated for the sentence he was given. So it's just a sense that there is not justice, and that obviously for the family feels like their daughter's memory is not being honored, and it feels that the sentence that they fought so hard for in that complex criminal justice system has now almost let them down, because it shifted back to them when they thought he would only get parole in 2030. Now all of a sudden there's talk of him getting parole this year.
Look, and on that case, on the justice system, I mean, what we obviously heard when the conviction happened was life imprisonment. Now, of course, based on a number of factors, this can be reduced to a certain year. As you mentioned, 2030 was supposed to be the original parole. It's moved back 9 years. Are we at a point where question marks have to be put onto the justice system? I know as citizens of South Africa, it's generally our nature to question the justice system, but this gives further justification, doesn't it?
I mean, my basic statement was that I didn't sign up to a constitutional democracy and to a system that would let convicted rapists, and as in the case of Hewitt, or murderers, as in the case of Mr. Moodley, out onto the streets to sort of be my neighbors and to live next door to me, if they had not shown remorse or rehabilitation. I think that our culture of protest in South Africa is really important, but we also need to recognize that as a South African society, we are also fair, because we engaged in processes like the TRC. When people showed true remorse, we were willing to, engage in restorative justice processes. But the thing as a society that we are really questioning the Justice Department on is based on what grounds, as members of our society, are we allowing those people back into our communities? If they are not rehabilitated, we cannot restore them to their places in the community.
Look, let's go to the year that was, of course, 2004, and we've seen so many cases of gender-based violence since then. Of course, 2019, we saw the students, Uyaneni Rikitana, getting, of course, murdered. We saw last year Tsekovatsopule, another case. And of course, within your organization, I mean, there's a strong emphasis on trying to stop these abuse against women and children. It was another innocent life that was lost, wasn't it, Luke? Leigh Matthews, a student who wanted to be a contributor to society, had lost a life by once again a toxic masculinity, which was again reaping its head then and continues to reap its ugly head right now.
You make an exceptionally important point, because if we look at every family meeting we have had with the president, he has stated that GBV is our second pandemic. He in fact put in place, prior to the COVID pandemic, he put in place a 5-point plan to deal with GBV, recognizing it's that important, it's that much of a national priority that it will be included in speeches around the pandemic. I mean, that's just an absolute recognition of the gravity of what we are facing. And then what happens is we have things like in the middle, well, not things, processes, in the middle of it, like Mr. Hewitt, who's a convicted child rapist, getting parole. And we know, because I was there, we know that Mr. Hewitt had no remorse. Now you, in the middle of this, get another parole application for somebody who has not only murdered somebody, but murdered them in the most heinous way, not told the truth, and they are by default considered for parole. So it just seems that point 4 of Mr. Ramaphosa's plan is almost like lip service. It's like there is no regard for victims in the current system. It is always about the rights of the accused, the fact that he has a right to a fair trial. There must be a conviction beyond a reasonable doubt. And within that context, once he is now convicted and sentenced, he now is entitled to a process where the victims, it appears, need to give reasons why he needs to remain in jail, rather than him and correctional services giving reasons why they need to be released. It's just entirely skewed away from the rights of the victims, and in our opinion, not in keeping with the presidential 5-point plan on GBV.
One final question, Luke. Of course, no matter what happens, whether the parole gets granted or not, surely the Matthews family, and am I right in saying this, will still feel that justice has not been served for the murder of their daughter?
Absolutely. I think that is entirely correct. And I think what Mr. Matthews very clearly said in the press conference yesterday is that until everybody who was responsible for the death of his daughter is jailed and held accountable, they will not be able to feel that justice has been served. And at this stage, Mr. Moodley holds the key to that, and the people or person that was an accomplice or alleged accomplice who is still out in society, who has not come forward of their own accord, they will not believe that justice has been served. And if Mr. Moodley then gets parole without any of this being disclosed and the truth being told, he said that until Mr. Matthews said that until the people or the person who was also party to his daughter's murder is in jail, the family will not rest.
Luke Lamprecht, I would like to say thank you so much for joining us this afternoon, and we wish you all the best in your organization in trying to combat gender-based violence, which is another pandemic which continues to affect the country.
Thanks for your patience with my signal.
No, it's fine. It's an absolute pleasure. Luke Lamprecht, the advocacy manager from the Women and Men Against Child Abuse. Again, yeah, this just is another tale in what gender-based violence has done in South Africa, and Leigh Matthews is just another victim. And unfortunately, the man who's responsible for her murder may just be getting parole. I tell you what, how sweet is our justice system. Well, after the break, we will be switching our focus to international news. Stay tuned.